Hey, welcome back to Change the Odds, the podcast where marriage and family were never meant to be a game of chance. Hey, just me and you today, Blaine and Adrian. It's summertime around here, July 1st, as this is being released. And so I believe they're probably in Canada celebrating with family. And so it's just me and you today. Hey, one thing I want to make you aware of before we jump into today's episode, you're going to be hearing a lot about it. Well, we are just a month away from the release of my next book, The Creation of Us. And so it's been 10 years since Friend, Partner, and Lover came out. Now, since then, obviously, I've written some other things, Happily, Fearless Families. More recently, Stay in Your Lane, Love Styles. Stay in Your Lane, Love Styles really are. They're the 6x6 small book, kind of going after one problem. But The Creation of Us really kind of is my reflection over these last 10 years of marriage and kind of a follow-up to Friends, Partners, and Lovers, much more research, detail, those kinds of things. So go to Amazon, order it now. Probably by next week, we'll be able to release some details of what we're going to do. For those who pre-order, there is going to be a giveaway. So all you'll have to do is have a picture, be ready to send in that picture. If I call you and you win the giveaway, I think you're going to like it. I'm not ready to announce it yet, but we'll look at it next week. But today, I want to do something a little bit different in that many of you know me, many of you may not. Some who are watching back in Arkansas, you know my story well. Some in California, Canada, various other places. You don't know much the background. You know where I am now, kind of what I do today. But I'm going to kind of give you an inside look, a peel back a little bit to a little bit of history. I'm just going to call this the Ella episode. I wish you were here. She's not. She is actually on vacation herself. What kind of life is she living compared to me? But today, July 1st, is actually Ella's 21st birthday, which is mind-boggling, the fact that our oldest child is now 21. But as you know, Ella having Down syndrome, I want to just peel back some of the origin story of Ella, what that has been like, how it's impacted Jenny and I from a marriage standpoint. Might even talk a little bit about what it looks like from a family standpoint for Silas, if we could have him on at some point. I wish Ella was here today. She's not. However, if you go to the Bayside YouTube channel, Ella and I shot a refuel a few weeks ago that actually airs today, July 1st, on her birthday. So if you're listening to this sometime after that, you can go back July 1st, 2026 at the Bayside YouTube channel, look at that refuel. You can see her as we shoot that together. But I'm going to give you just kind of some background, some history of what this looks like. So Jenny and I, whenever we first got married, we kind of had this discussion that we wanted to wait a little bit longer before having kids than maybe what was kind of the norm where we were, although many things have changed in the last couple of decades. So we got married at the age of 23. So our basic thought was, hey, let's wait till 30. And let's have a couple of kids. We kind of always thought two. Jenny comes from a family of three. I come from a family of two. So the over-under was probably 2.5 for us of what we would end up with. And so we thought we'd wait till 30, but as typically happens, very commonly happens, as we got a little bit older, we begin to think, well, maybe we'll move that target date up a little bit. You never know how long it's going to take to get pregnant. That's one of the things about the pastorate that was so interesting to me is I just always thought if you want to get pregnant, you got pregnant. And then I get into the pastorate, we have all these friends, and then you start recognizing how difficult it can be, how some struggle with infertility. Others, you have miscarriages. Jenny and I had one of those after Ella. And so you recognize it's just not as easy as you might have thought that it was. So we decided to go ahead and kind of move up our date to some extent and got pregnant fairly quickly, I would say. I don't remember exactly, but it seemed like it was fairly quickly. Jenny told me, I remember the way Jenny told me that we were pregnant was she was actually was out in Napa, staying at the Fairmont Sonoma with her company, which is a place we were just at doing a marriage retreat. And while she was there, she had a dream that she was pregnant. Flew home, took a pregnancy test, and sure enough, she actually was pregnant whenever she had that dream. Just didn't know it. It was so cool. A couple of weeks ago, I was actually back. We were back for the first time at the Fairmont Sonoma, and Ella was actually with us because of how kind of things worked out. So surreal to be there 21 years kind of after the fact. So the way Jenny told me that she was pregnant is I knew she was taking a pregnancy test that Sunday morning, but I told her, you cannot do this to me. don't take it on a Sunday morning, take it tomorrow. And so I left for church because there's no way I want to be preaching a couple services, looking at her out there wondering, are we pregnant or not? So she's like, all right. So she was going to take it on Monday. So I preached 2 services. We get in the car. We're going to go to lunch with a couple. And as we're literally in a half-mile drive, Jenny says, hey, by the way, I took that pregnancy test and we're pregnant. And then we had to walk in to this couple. So it was mind-boggling, that whole concept, how my world was just shifted and turned upside down immediately. It was a great kind of pregnancy, easy for me to say. I'm a guy, but I think Jenny would call it a great first pregnancy. No signs whatsoever that there was anything different about Ella along the way. We were excited when we found out that we had a girl. We wanted to know quickly, and we got to know that she was going to be a girl. I still remember when the doctor came in, probably at 6 months, and they had done all these tests, and the doctor said she doesn't have this, she doesn't have this, she doesn't have Down syndrome. And so Ella was a rare false negative, where that test said that. At the time, the ultrasound technology was good enough that maybe it could have been picked up, but it wasn't, which is totally fine with us in retrospect. And so Jenny, the whole time, Jenny is somewhat of a control person in many ways. The due date was early July. Jenny knew because of her schedule how busy it was working with an advertising company. And Jenny said from the get-go, when she found out what the due date was, she said, I have to make it to July 1st. The baby has to make it to July 1st because that was going to go into the 4th of July weekend. I think the 4th of July on that weekend was on a Monday. And so she's like, I just got to make it that weekend, and then I can get on maternity leave. And so the Thursday of the end of June, we actually went to a doctor's appointment. Jenny is convinced that she's about to go into labor. We go to the doctor's appointment, and the doctor said, no, you're actually not close, and everything's fine. She had made it now to the weekend that she wanted to make it to. And so as we were driving home that night, Jenny said, hey, I still think I'm going into labor. And I was like, this is the first time. They see this all the time. You don't know what you're talking about. And about 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, we're about to go to bed. And Jenny said, hey, you might want to go ahead and take a shower. She said, maybe I'm not going into labor. Maybe we're not having this baby tonight, but we are going to the hospital tonight. I can assure you of that. And so I went and took a shower. I remember in the midst of taking that shower, just thinking about the song that it's really an old hymn actually that had been redone at that moment, and the song was the hymn is "Lift Up Your Head," that God will lift up your head, and the hope of what that is to look like. That there's pain, there's sorrow, but in the end, God is sovereignly in control. And so we went to the hospital that night, and as we got there, the nurses checked her and said, "Well, sure enough, you are, in fact, going into labor, no doubt." So we checked in, and this is going to be the event. They said, hey, the next morning we'll probably, help and induce in some way, but you're in active labor. And so the next morning, the doctor showed up, and everything was kind of a go. But Ella's heart rate was low. We didn't know why at the time. Now we understand it was part of Down syndrome. And the doctor told Jenny that she actually wasn't allowed to have an epidural. And I'll never forget the look on Jenny's face, in that she had never realized that was a possibility. She just assumed that if I want an epidural, I'll get one. She never knew the idea that there'd be scenarios where you couldn't get one. And she just kept on saying, I can't do this. And I just kept on trying to reassure her, you can and you will. I didn't mean it dogmatically. I think sometimes she took it dogmatically. But you can and you will. Like God will see you through this process. And so it was a lengthy labor. There was talk at one point we might have to do a C-section. And so while we had gone to the hospital like 11 o'clock the previous night, Ella is finally born at about 5 o'clock at night. I'll never forget one of the downsides, I think you've heard me say this before, of that delivery is I got so fascinated with the delivery process that I might not have had been as loving and supporting my wife as I possibly could have been. It was a church member who was delivering Ella. Matter of fact, that church member at one point said, hey, whatever you do, don't talk about me on Sunday, meaning the Sunday after Ella was born. And I, sure enough, quoted her on that the next time I preached. But I got so fascinated by this. And at one point, the doctor actually said, hey, what's happening here is now the baby's head is actually turning, and then it comes underneath this bone, and then it lifts up. I thought, how powerful is that that literally there's a lifting, the birth process lifts up the head. It goes exactly to what the hymn was saying. Jenny would say that later that I pastored that doctor very well through the delivery, implying that I didn't pastor her very well. So we all make mistakes, right? So Ella's born. First child for us. We don't know anything is different or unique. Obviously, the nurses did. The doctor did. Later, the doctor would say, I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but I knew something was going on. But that's not the moment in which they tell you. You're there in that moment to celebrate the birth. I want to make sure the baby is okay. I would find out later that they actually gave some pretty extra attention because they could tell something was different than what was typical. And but eventually everything was fine. Baby was cleaned up. I held Ella. I'll never forget. As I held Ella for the first time, don't forget Ella's name, my grandmother, Ella Catherine Thompson, in part from my perspective, maybe not Jenny's, but from my perspective, her name was chosen because it would look good on a book. So the idea of hey, let's name you to give you a future career. Maybe you can actually, I write books, maybe you could actually sell books. But as I held her in that moment, I could just sense this idea of how tempting it would be to try to live out your hopes and dreams through your child. And that's not fair to them. It's not what you're actually called to do. And so the very first prayer I ever prayed for Ella before I knew anything about Down syndrome was, Lord, just let me love her, whoever she is, and let me be for her whatever it is that she needs. Strip me of all my expectations and let me just father her well. That was the prayer I prayed before the diagnosis. Theological side note. I think God often gives us the answers before we ask the questions. Whether it be the power of his Spirit at work within our lives or Scripture that's already kind of been revealed to us, I think very often God will show us what we need before we're even asking. And so later, whenever the diagnosis came, if I had have asked, Lord, what do I pray? I would have already known because I'd actually already prayed it. God tends to show us before we know the need. So we're there in that moment celebrating and all these things. I bring my mom in, and I'll never forget kind of looking over in the distance. I'm still kind of there with Jenny, and Mom is holding Ella. Mom is gently crying. I thought, oh, she's crying because she's holding her another grandchild. How excited is she? I would find out later that my mom, who taught school for 40 years, knew by the facial recognition that Ella had Down syndrome, but she didn't tell us. She knew it wasn't her place to tell us. So Ella was born at 5 o'clock at night. Several hours later, about 9:30, my pediatrician walks in. And whenever I say my pediatrician, I literally mean the guy who was my pediatrician growing up. He was also my next door neighbor. It was Arkansas. He was my mechanic. He did a lot of things. But he walked in, and it's funny. Whenever he first walked in, my first thought was, "Oh, I bet you he wants to play golf early tomorrow, and that's why he's coming tonight. That way, he doesn't have to come early in the morning because he and I would actually often play golf of a morning." But as he took Ella and he asked the room to clear, he took Ella and he began to talk. I began to get this pastoral sense. As a pastor, I've sat in these rooms many a time, and I could tell something was wrong. He's here to deliver news of some sort. And I was kind of watching him, kind of watching Jenny. I didn't get any sense that Jenny could tell what was going on. She had been through enough. And I just remember sitting there thinking, just get it over with. Just tell me what's going on. And finally, after he brilliantly kind of pointed out everything that was so right about Ella, he then began to say, hey, if you'll notice a few things, notice how cute her nose is, how it's almost a perfect shape to her head. Her eyes are a little bit more oval. I notice her ears are set a little bit lower. If you notice her pinky actually turns inward, the crease in her hand, there's one that runs straight across her hand. Same thing with her foot. Notice on her foot, there's a space between her big toe and her next toe. And he just began to point out, and finally he said, these are all very classic signs of Down syndrome. I'm convinced that Ella actually has Down syndrome. And we took in that information in that moment, recognizing this was a diagnosis that would forever change her life. It would forever change our lives as well. It wasn't a tragic diagnosis by any means. And yet at the same time, it's a diagnosis obviously we would change if we could. And so then we were sitting there in the midst of this tremendous joy over this life that we have now been given and we get to shepherd over and watch. And yet at the same time, this very real grief. It's interesting. I will often remind people that use both hands whenever it comes to life. That you have two hands, which means you can hold, you can carry more than one thing at a time. And so you can literally hold grief in your hand and not like how life has turned out, something that's been sent your way. You can feel that to the fullness of what's going on. But at the exact same time, you can also hold gratitude, that sense of happiness, of joy, of thankfulness for what's been handed to you. Some are foolishly saying these days that the brain is incapable of experiencing grief and gratitude at the same time, or anxiety and gratitude at the same time. So just be grateful and we won't be anxious anymore. But that's not how the brain works. It's not how we work. We can operate by holding more than one thing at a time. You can be anxious and thankful all at the same time. So use both hands. And in that moment, I felt like we tried to do that. That we tried to hold both hands. A friend of mine would later call me, and as we were talking about the diagnosis, she said, "Kevin, congratulations, and I'm sorry." And later she called back to apologize, afraid that she had said the wrong thing. And I told her, I said, no, you actually said the great thing, the right thing. You recognize both of our experiences here, that we're feeling both of these things and probably will for the rest of our lives, a gratefulness for who Ella is and the joy of everything she's about. And the drawbacks and the downsides that she does experience on a regular basis, as there are limitations that she has to endure and experience, not only with her own body and her own self, but also the limitations of those who are around her and the expectations that can be there. We were trying to live in both spaces, and our pediatrician just did a brilliant job of delivering the news. And finally, it kind of came to an end. And back then, they would take the baby actually back to the nursery. I don't think they'd really do that anymore. Back then, whenever you were staying in the hospital for 2 days, they would take the baby at night to the nursery. That way you could sleep. Now they're just like, good luck. And so he walked Ella out and took her back to the nursery. I walked him out. He said some encouraging things to me. We'd known each other for so long. And then I finally walked back into the room. And many of you have heard the story. It's kind of the concluding story I put in Stay in Your Lane, because I think it so symbolizes and epitomizes who Jenny is, but then also what a response of faith is. And as I walked back in the room, I walked over to Jenny, and the very first words that Jenny spoke to me after the diagnosis of Ella, after nearly 24 hours of painful labor without any epidural, the very first words Jenny spoke to me were, well, this is a road we never would have chosen to go down, but I bet you we never regret going down it. And to me, it's just this beautiful picture of Jenny living with open hands, of being willing to accept whatever belongs to God. And Stay in Your Lane, we talk about what's mine, what's theirs, what's God's. And God is in charge of a diagnosis. God is in charge of giving life. God is in charge of who is born to us. And God is in charge of those things. We don't have a say. We can pray and hopefully influence it, and we had prayed for health for a long time. And in many ways, God answered that prayer for health, because Ella had a healthy heart and lungs and gastrointestinal. All these things are very typical Down syndrome things Ella really didn't struggle with, which has empowered her to get so far ahead in so many ways. But at the same time, there was this diagnosis that would be life-changing for her and for us. And we'd prayed, and in the end, we got to trust what God hands to us. And so Jenny, I think, just so beautifully kind of symbolized what it means to live open-handedly and to accept whatever God gives to you, and then take that and to build on it to the best of your ability. And then Ella was here. And then we got into the early before elementary school. You're getting into the therapy and all the things that we got very aggressive with our ears. There's such a connection between hearing and mental cognition, and so we got really aggressive with her ears, some kind people that helped us with that, with all the therapies, physical therapy and speech therapy and occupational therapy. That Kids First back in Arkansas was just a godsend to us, and all these great people around us telling us, hey, Ella's gonna do so well. And even early on, you could begin to see Ella's personality. A lot of people, whenever they meet somebody with Down syndrome, they'll say, oh, those are the most loving people ever. And Jenny and I are always like, yep, most of them are. Not necessarily all of them. And Ella is extremely loving, but she's always had the personality where she'd punch in the face if she needs to. That she doesn't just run up to somebody and hug somebody. Some people get caught off guard because Ella is a little bit more reserved. Once she knows you, she'll open up to you in a great way, but she's a little bit more reserved, stand back, kind of knows what she wants. And so early on, you could even see her personality. I remember one day I went to pick her up from her preschool, and her teacher said, hey, Kevin, we got a problem. Ella kicked one of her teachers today. I said, okay, well, I'll take care of that. So I got Ella home, and whenever we got home, I set her down. I said, hey, Ella, did you kick one of your teachers today? She goes, no, Daddy, I didn't. I said, now, Ella, I know that you did. I'm going to put you in timeout because you can't lie to me. So I put Ella, in a little 2-minute timeout or something like that. It ended up bringing her back out. And I said, all right, Ella, I'm going to give you another chance. Did you kick one of your teachers today? No, Daddy, I didn't. I said, Ella, I gave her a more stern lecture about the importance of telling the truth, put her back into timeout. This time at timeout, she gets very kind of upset, begins to cry. Eventually, I pull her out. I said, Ella, this is your last chance. Either you tell me the truth or there's going to be extreme consequences, not because you kicked one of your teachers. There's going to be extreme consequences because you're lying to me, and our relationship has to be built on the truth. Ella, did you kick one of your teachers today? She goes, no, Daddy, I didn't. I kicked both of them. Okay, all the punishment is now over, right? Totally fine. And then she would have no hesitation of doing something like that. I remember one time I put Ella in timeout. She was supposed to spend the night with my sister, who she absolutely adores. And so she's probably 4, 5, 6, something like this. So she was going to spend the night with my sister, which obviously Jenny and I love. We would get to sleep in, spend time together, all those things. And she was doing something that she shouldn't be doing. And so I put her into timeout. She wasn't very remorseful over that. And I remember standing in there, a little timeout corner there, and looking at her and trying to get her to repent in some way, and she wouldn't do it. And I finally said, Ella, if you do that again, or if you don't say that you're sorry, I'm going to call Aunt Lee and tell her that you can't spend the night. And Ella, knowing I wanted her to spend the night, looked at me and goes, call her. Like, just dared me, like, go ahead, you do it, right? So that's kind of Ella's personality. There's a strong will in there. We would always say, whenever it comes with Ella with Down syndrome, her speech can be delayed, her hearing can be delayed, her will is fully developed. But there's such a gift within that. And then all in the elementary school years, just had such a great support system that was there. But there's difficulties. I'll never forget our first IEP meeting, and many of you know what that is. Some of you maybe don't. So it's an individualized educational plan. And so when Ella was entering into the elementary school system in kindergarten, they create this very specified plan, which she still has today, which is great. It's a great gift. So grateful for the country in which we live and the opportunity to have those kind of things. But to walk in that meeting the first time, and so here Jenny and I are with our first child, doing the best we can. We're about to send her off to kindergarten. That was scary enough. And we walk into this meeting, and literally there's like 3 tables lined up. There's probably 8 or 9 people. The principal, the teacher, the occupational therapist, the speech therapist, the physical therapist, the special ed coordinator, somebody from the school district. All these people are there going through these IEP meetings like crazy. They do this literally full time. And here we are sitting over on the other side, almost like we're about to give testimony to Congress and being questioned. And they were kind, no doubt, but at the same time, they were business, and they're used to these kinds of things. And I'll never forget, at the end, they asked me to, not at the end, maybe at the beginning, they said, hey, here's the plan, I need you to sign that. And I said, oh, thank you, I'll take it home and read it. And so about midway through, the special ed coordinator said, hey, I need you to sign that. I said, no, I'm going to take it home and read it. And finally, at the end, got a little bit more dogmatic with me of, hey, we have to have that signed. I said, I'm not signing this. Like, I haven't even read it. I don't even know what's going on. And the principal kind of stepped in and said, hey, no, you should go home and read that. You don't have to sign it in any way. We're just not used to working with as many parents who are this involved, this engaged. And we recognize the freedom that we had and the liberty and to be able to both of us be sitting there, to skip work and be sitting there in that moment. And so I could later read that and take it back and sign it and agree. But elementary school years were great years. Ella achieved in so many ways, was mainstreamed in all the typical classes and in very powerful and meaningful ways. And I think what's amazing to us is the moment for me, the moment school started for Ella. It's like a clock starts. So you recognize that you have these years in elementary, junior high, and high school. And because of special ed needs, you actually have a couple years extra. Maybe it's not just till you're 18. I think you can go till 21. But you recognize that, hey, here's what it's going to be for Ella over these next however many, 12 years. Here's what it's going to look like for her. And Jenny's running her business, and I'm working and writing and doing all my things. And so we have to have a caretaker. We have to have a place for Ella to go. And she needs her education and those kind of things. But the clock is ticking to such an extent that as Ella got into upper elementary school, we begin to wonder, man, what's next for her? And we're not very far away. And where we were in Arkansas, to my knowledge, I don't ever remember her having another friend with Down syndrome. The population size just wasn't large enough for that to happen. Jenny and I actually began to talk about, man, when she graduates, are we going to need to move to Kansas City or Tulsa or Dallas to give her more resources? Sacramento, California was never a thought or an option. But sure enough, as she got into going into 10th grade is when we got the call to come out here to California. A very interesting story that some people have heard, some haven't. So Jenny and I flew out to California to interview here at Bayside. Nobody knew. Obviously, small town, you got to be careful of how that goes. So we actually come out here, we accept the job, we fly back home. But our kids then, soon to be 10th grade and upcoming 8th grader, they were about to head to church camp. And so we couldn't exactly fly home and tell them, hey, we're about to move to California. Now, y'all go to church camp. Don't tell anybody because we got to tell the church and all these other people. So it was actually a secret. And we thought, we'll send them to church camp, and then after church camp, we'll tell them how we're about to run their lives. What better time to move in life than 10th grade and 8th grade if you want to spend the rest of your life in therapy? And so I'll never forget, we just had a couple days that we were going to be home before we sent them off to church camp. So Jenny and I knew we were moving to California. The kids knew nothing. And one day I'm sitting with Jenny in her office, and Silas comes downstairs and goes, Dad, you got to tell Ella that we are not moving to California. I mean, my head snapped. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, Ella's upstairs watching Full House, and she is convinced we are moving to California, and she's going to be best friends with Candace Cameron. And I'm like, well, buddy, you never know. Joking around. Interesting story. Flash forward then maybe a year. And we meet a friend here at Bayside who knows Candace Cameron, finds out what this story is about. And so we schedule a time in which they're going to come over to the house, and our friend has set up with Candace a phone call, a FaceTime. And sure enough, Ella comes down. We get on the phone. Candace Cameron is now talking to Ella as we live in California. And I call Silas over, and I said, hey, Silas, where do we live? He said, California. I said, who is Ella talking to? He goes, Candace Cameron. I said, bud, you just never know. You never know what God might actually do. Now, here's what's intriguing to me about our move to California. Whenever we moved here, we didn't move with this idea of, man, if we go there, there's this great college and there's this program and everything's going to be right for Ella. It didn't happen that way. We moved in part knowing that Ella probably needed and could benefit from some more resources. But whenever we moved here, at the time that we moved here, at the exact same time, UC Davis was beginning this program for those with intellectual disabilities called the Redwood Seed Program, where every year they take 10 students to come in as freshmen, and then those students are given a 4-year college experience to live the first couple years in dorms, go to classes, have internships and jobs. The next 2 years they move into apartments, and the idea is job training, learn life skills, learning to live on your own. The first graduating class just happened, and 7 of those 8 students who graduated are employed and now live on their own in a population which that is a very rare thing to happen. But what intrigues me is we had no idea as we were moving that very thing was happening. It wasn't until a year later that we heard about the program, that we then applied, that Ella then got accepted, and how fascinating it is that now where we had taken this step of faith, that now we live 45 minutes from the absolute best program west of the Mississippi, the only program, I think, west of the Mississippi, to give an on-campus 4-year experience with those with intellectual disabilities, with a preference toward those with Down syndrome, because the people that started the program, the main person, her son has Down syndrome. Isn't it just like God to kind of orchestrate all those things together? And as I step back on this Ella's 21st birthday, when she finds out I'm doing this, she's going to be very frustrated that she's not here, because she would love to be on camera and love to be seen by you. There's a few reflections that I have. I've already given a couple within the midst of this podcast so far, but just a few things I want to look back on that I think are so important, in no specific order, but just how they kind of come to my mind in this moment. The first one is this. It matters who you marry. It just does. I just can't fathom doing this life with anybody other than Jenny, and who she is, her faith, how hardworking she is, how great of a mother she is, how great of a wife she is, and striving to serve and love everybody else. It is interesting whenever I think about, if you mark my life as the two most important decisions are Jesus and Jenny, and in that order, it's so satisfying to know that I've gotten both of those decisions right, even though I can't take credit for them. They are truly gifts from God himself. So it matters who you marry. The second thing I think of whenever it comes to this is sometimes life takes a turn that you don't expect, and in faith you can trust that turn will not only be for your good, but also for God's glory. And oftentimes, life turns out better than you expect. That even though this, like Jenny said, this is a road we never would have chosen to go down, and there are hardships about it. If we got to be careful to not kind of whitewash over the true parenting realities, the true realities for Ella in living in this culture and society and time where primarily people are valued by what they can produce instead of just who they actually are. Now we live in a far better time than we have in past, but there are hardships that maybe we don't talk about very much. At the same time, there's some aspects to this life that are so great, and I can't imagine obviously life without Ella, and I think it's possible that when God looks at my own need and the need for my heart now to be transformed into his likeness, one of the divine sovereign choices he made was you need somebody like Ella in your life. And so whenever life takes a turn that you don't expect, you don't have to like it. You don't have to appreciate everything about it. You can use both hands to have gratitude and grief all at the same time. You can be anxious and grateful all at the same time. But at the same time, you can lean in with a kind of a sense of holy expectation. All right, God, what do you have in store for us? And specifically, I think my point would be to learn to trust God together. Now, to do that, you both have to individually trust God, and that's important. But to have this shared faith that together we're going to figure out how to trust God in the situation that we don't fully know or understand. We can see that God's always been with us in the past, and we know the promise of Scripture, he'll be with us in the future. And we may not be able to identify exactly what he's doing right now, but we're going to trust him. And so often what trust means is we're going to do the right thing in the moment and believe that God's going to use that in the proper ways. And so we can't identify everything that we need to do, but we tend to know what we need to do right now. For Ella, when she was born, it was we just need to love her well, raise her like any other kid that we would raise. What it means right now for Ella at the age of 21, it means we got to take some risk that we may not feel that comfortable with, but we got to test some boundaries to begin to see what are her capabilities and what are her limitations. That's what this Redwood Seed program is doing in so many ways. Is left to our own devices, Jenny and I would unknowingly limit her. And so what this program does is to give her more freedom than what we're comfortable with, and then see what can she handle or not handle, and then we can pull back to give the appropriate modifications. Ella's about to fly for the very first time. If things go as planned, Ella's going to fly by herself for the very first time. It's scary for us, but it's probably good for her. And if she can't handle it, we'll know from this point on, all right, we can't do that. But if she can handle it, imagine the freedom that that would now give to her in her life. And so what it means for us is we got to take this risk to trust that, all right, God is sovereignly in control of this. We're not going to be foolish. We're going to make the wisest choice that we can. But we got to lean in faith and trust God in the midst of what it is that he's doing. So recognize who you marry truly does matter. Learn to trust God together as a couple. Live with both hands and experience those things. And then just have this overwhelming sense of gratitude, even as you recognize, you know what, everybody has a story. I know what you project online, or I know what you project in person, but there's always a story behind it. And even as we're living our own story, that should give us a tremendous sense of compassion and grace toward other people in what they're doing. 21 years. It's fascinating to even think about. And yet we can recognize Ella not only as a tremendous gift to us, but also to others. You know, there's some ways in which I think Ella is already far more like Jesus than I am. And I need to, as I become like him, I'm actually going to become in some ways more like her. There's other ways in which one day she will become more like Jesus, and she has to grow and transform. Here's the way I tend to say it. I don't know how many chromosomes we're going to have in heaven. I know on earth she and I have a different number. I don't know how much we'll have in heaven. But there's some ways that I wouldn't know Jesus fully except knowing her. And then there's hopefully some other ways that she wouldn't know Jesus fully without knowing me. And together, we're now trying to pursue after him to become the people he desires us to be, trusting that he's in the work in the midst of everything. I don't know how that applies to you, but that's a little bit of the background story of what I'm calling the Ella episode. And so whenever I write on marriage, whenever I talk about parenting or faith or leadership or anything you hear me talk about, this is an aspect of my life that dominates so much of it, but also helps form so much of how God kind of interacts with me and those things that I have to focus in on and think about. They may not be the exact same things that you're dealing with or working on, but there's some basic principles that are probably universally true for all of us. And so whatever you're facing today, as I sit here on her 21st birthday and look back to 21 years ago, I can just simply say, man, God's been faithful. He's been good. It's been hard at times, but he's been faithfully good. And if he has been faithfully good, he will be faithfully good. He probably is being faithfully good right now. So let's lean on him and trust him as best as we possibly can. If we can ever help you in any way, don't hesitate to reach out. Go to YouTube, like, subscribe, Apple, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening. Pass this on to somebody today who maybe they have a child with Down syndrome. You can pass this on to them. Maybe they don't, but there's a circumstance going on in their life or within their marriage where maybe just hearing somebody else's story could be beneficial. And I'd be grateful if you do. Until next time, don't forget, change the odds. Marriage and family were never meant to be a game of chance. We'll see you next time.